now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today as we move forward to the conclusion of our session. Elaine Duke is the principal of Elaine Duke and Associates LLC, and after recently retiring from Deloitte Consulting, government and public service, she is now running her own organization. She was the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security from April 2017 to April 2018, during which time she also served as the Acting Secretary of Homeland Security from July to December of 2017. Elaine was the first Deputy Assistant Administrator for Acquisition and the Transportation Security Administration. That's a long sentence. I got it, Elaine. Delivering an acquisition program that met the post-9/11 legislative mandate to federalize passenger and baggage screening at U.S. airports. Without further ado, please help me welcome Elaine to the stage.
Thank you so much. Okay. So and thank you all. Please, please, please keep eating. I'm going to talk about the values of our country a little bit, and I think eating is one of the social values of our country. And I'm 100% Italian too, so if I see you not eating, I won't be able to concentrate. So please enjoy your lunch. And thank you for having me here today. And thank you for so many of you for serving your country, whether it's in law enforcement or your state, local, or federal governments. Appreciate your service. I did have the honor to serve as the Deputy Secretary and Acting Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. And before that, I was a civil servant in Department of Defense, Transportation, Smithsonian, and as mentioned, the stand-up of TSA after the acts of terrorism on our own land. But I come today as a fellow American, concerned about our homeland, its security, its health, and importantly, its values. We are facing a changing time in our country's posture towards immigration. And what I hope and pray for is that it is a time that includes legal immigration, a secure border, and a compassion for all people that is consistent with our country's values. Today, I would like to issue a call to action. We must do something differently. I have a call of action to our Congress to act on immigration reform. I know this is going to be hard, but hear me out for just a minute. I help legal immigrants that are seeking naturalization, and I help them with preparing for a civics test, which is based on 100 questions about our country's foundations and civics. I'm going to mention a couple of those today, but I think we'd all be, citizens or not, well served to review those 100 questions about our country's government itself. There are 2 questions about the branches of government. Our Constitution sets up 3 branches of government, and each must be acting effectively for a strong government. We need that balance of power that results in a government stronger than its 3 individual branches. That is not the case now. On the hill, we're paralyzed. Instead of being valued as a key element of success, bipartisanship is disdained. Members who work across aisles face issues and discipline from their respective parties. That must change, and laws must be passed. As a result of our Congress's inability to enact and update key legislation, a series of incongruent legal decisions and executive orders that don't form a consistent solution and policy rule our country, rather than current law that shows what we want out of our immigration and other systems. I'm not going to even talk about budget and non-ability to pass a budget. I need to say a few words on immigration reform. It must deal with our past and our future. We have to decide what to do with the undocumented population in our country now. That includes those that have entered the country recently, but even more challenging, those that have been in our country without documentation for many, many years. And because of an unstable and incongruent immigration policy have been educated, and we just heard that in our last panel, work, pay taxes, and have American-born children. We have to deal with those, and we have to deal with them in a way that doesn't create hate and discontent. You know, one of the words that I think we're going to hear thrown out is amnesty. And amnesty is an emotional word, and I think it seeks to distract us from the real issue of what is the right thing to do with this population that has been in our country for many years and in many cases their whole life. We hear about plea deals all the time. We hear about forgiveness, but then we throw out amnesty and there's rage. And so we have to replace those words with words that are more consistent with our feelings and our values about a population in our society. We need a set of laws for the future that manages our border effectively to deliver a legal immigration system that is secure. We have to make sure that people coming into our country aren't going to create a danger in terms of terrorism or threats against our country, but we have to have an immigration system. That's what we're founded on, and that's what we need. We have so many bad workarounds in our immigration system right now. One of them is DACA, and we heard about DACA. In fact, I was interested to learn that Raina is a dreamer herself. One example of, I think, a bad fix is DACA, and the reason is it isn't a fix. First of all, it's founded by an executive order that's acting as a law, and because of that, those people and DACA is going to be continually subject to the ebbs and flows of our intense political environment. That is not a solution, it is a Band-Aid. Second, it does not provide a path to citizenship for those that are protected by it. They remain in deferred action for their whole lives while they continue to function as Americans, including parenting American children. Each day knowing that they could be separated from those children if DACA is ended. That deferred action. You know, people keep saying DACA, and I don't think even some of the younger generation knows what DACA stands for. It's deferred action. It's not a path, it's not a solution, it's a temporary hold. When you support providing a path for those persons brought to America as children or not, the purgatory perpetually that a deferred action on their removal from our country is not compassionate or a solution. We need to have a fix for those, our past, as I call them. I have a call to action for the incoming administration. And that number one is to heal the anger and divide in our country. It is unhealthy, both from a value standpoint, but also from a homeland security standpoint. We have to look at immigration comprehensively, not just how many immigrants do we want, how secure the border do we want, but how our immigration policy affects the people, the labor force, the economy, the Congress, the education. This is comprehensive. I personally don't think we'll be able to get comprehensive immigration reform, so we might have to take it in piecemeal, but we should be considering it not just as immigration, but what do we want for our country holistically. Another call to action for the incoming administration is to never forget that immigrants are people, humans, not a policy. We have laws in our country. There are two pieces of any policy or law. There's the policy or the law itself, and the way you implement that policy or law. The rule of law exists, of course, and I believe it. And that's another question in that immigrant citizenship civics test, by the way. What is the rule of law? And the answer is no one is above the law. But as we move through the immigration system, and possibly to deporting people, we must never forget that they are people, not a policy or a political agenda, but real people. We must heal our country and its divisions and remember that language and words matter. Words can infer a desire to govern effectively, or words can look for a desire to seek revenge or invoke hate and fear. We have to choose governing. A call to action for the incoming Secretary of Homeland Security and her leadership. It's important to manage all the missions of Department of Homeland Security with integrity and passion. As most of you know, in addition to the 3 immigration components, which are Customs and Border Protection, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement at ICE, or USCIS, which is the Citizenship Immigration Services, it includes key and essential missions for the health of our country and the security of our country. Secret Service, FEMA, Coast Guard, TSA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency. Each of these has important missions for our homeland. We have to remember why DHS was formed. It was formed as a result of an act of terrorism, and I can tell you that threat is no weaker. In fact, in many areas, it's much stronger against our country than it was when the World Trade Centers went down. And we have to make sure that immigration doesn't take over the money and the resources and the rhetoric to the point that those other missions suffer, and therefore our country suffers. Another call to action is to value the men and women of the department, and for that matter, all civil servants and its state, local, and first responder partners. We've seen this. There are a few bad actors, there always are in any population, but we've seen kind of lumping in civil servants into politics now, and that is not appropriate, it isn't right, and it doesn't credit them for their service, their public service to our country. And most importantly, I have a call of action to me and to each of you to engage. And that was their word of hope at the last panel. So it was interesting because I never met that panel before, but it must be true. Many of us will know the preamble to our Constitution. In case you don't have it at the top of your mind, the preamble is, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." How beautiful is that? It also is the final question in the civics exam that I'll mention. What are the first 3 words of the preamble? We the people. And that's the call to action in this room, is we the people. And what do we the people need to do? One is we need to hold elected officials accountable, both on the Hill and in the executive branch. We have allowed them to act against our wills. I think people say that with the win of the popular and the electoral vote, the people have spoken in terms of policy, but we must hold them accountable not only for policy, but for the values and the integrity of our country. I think there's a call of action to really learn the issues and the potential solutions to the issues. They are complex, and the 280 character limit in Twitter does not explain them. We have become a country of these bylines, and I think we don't even know what we're voting for. I spoke about DACA and temporary protected status, not an immigration program, but a complication in our country currently also, but asked them what they mean. They don't know. Even if they've walked in protest and held signs, still don't really know what it is. And that's not tolerable. Voting is a privilege that many people in many countries don't have. And to vote without knowledge is really kind of criminal in itself. The other thing I would call to action is muster the community. The federal government cannot and should not be solely responsible for keeping our communities secure. And we heard it from our 2 law enforcement personnel in the last panel. From a Homeland Security perspective, threats in the form of homegrown violent extremism are best identified by local communities and law enforcement. Terrorists don't follow the traditional path of escalating slowly from a minor crime to an act of terrorism. And it's impossible for the federal government, while it does have several key functions, to actually be ready for that and be able to track it. So it's important that we have these communities so that we can keep our country safe. Additionally, we need the communities to help each other. We saw that a lot with the Afghan refugees, where communities and churches rose up and helped people assimilate into our country. And I think that that assimilation, and again, the intelligence threat shows that assimilation is critical and key to the security of our homeland. It is a threat if we don't help people we welcome into our country assimilate into our culture. I'll conclude by what I believe is key to our country's recovery, and that is each one of us living out our values and our faith individually and in our community. That's living that preamble to the Constitution, which includes ensuring domestic tranquility and establishing justice and recognizing the blessings we were given to live in this country. We must be a country of laws, but we also must be a country of values, morals, standards, and principles about how we live and how we treat all people in our country. How we humans, many of whom have flourished in our country for decades, in reliance on our fragmented immigration system as we implement those laws. And yes, I am distinguishing. If people are in this country for 20, 30 years, as many under temporary protective status are, or many of the dreamers who came as children and relied on our incongruent and unenforced system to build sound lives in our country, I think they're a different population than a criminal population, and we must treat them that way. We can enforce laws with empathy and compassion, and that's absolutely critical, but we also must be talking about immigration reform and how to deal with these different populations within our immigration system. And finally, we have to live by the golden rule. When I got to this point, I was going to talk about the parable of the mustard seed. Anybody familiar with that? That's what popped into my head. And I thought, well, that's really about spreading faith. Then I got into my head and said, well, what's the difference between faith and some of these values I'm talking about? And then I decided, let's talk about James. James is my favorite book of the Bible, and I found like 8 verses in James I wanted to quote to you. And then I said 2 things. One is this isn't a sermon. And also, does that give people that aren't Christian an excuse not to do the call to action? So I ended up with saying, okay, the golden rule. It's no coincidence that the golden rule is in the Bible. In Christianity, one of the versions of it is, so whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. What was interesting, though, is this isn't a Christian principle. This is a human principle. And I'm not a very good researcher, but I did come up, with this, which you can't see. But this golden rule and this version of the golden rule is in virtually every community and religion, and it's virtually identical. In Taoism, it says, regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain, and your neighbor's loss as your own loss. Under Judaism, there was a student called Talmud Shabbat, and it's 31a, and I'm not a very learned person, but there's a famous account that Talmud tells about a Gentile who wanted to convert to Judaism. He stated that he would accept Judaism only if a rabbi would teach him the entire Torah while he stood on one foot. The rabbi replied, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the Torah. The rest is commentary. Now go and study. I thought that was pretty amazing. I could go through each one of these. There's Islam, there's Buddhism. Each one of them has that same basic principle of do unto others. Jesus used the word compassion and lived a compassionate life. And I think we're at a time in our country where we have to exhibit that in behavior, in words, and in action. And we're going to be told, and people are going to say, that's incongruent with the word of law. That's incongruent with a secure border. That is a lie, and it's a reason to try to disband us and make us insignificant. And what we have to do is be consistent not only with what laws we want with our country, but how we want to live and implement within that. And so that's my that call to action, is some will call us weak, because we want to be loving and compassionate. But you know what? That's what strong really is. That's what strong is, when you can put others with you and above you and show them what it means to be American. Thank you very much.